Kerry from McMillan Library in Wisconsin Rapids. And this is the very start of my new series, which will be airing bi-weekly on Saturday mornings. So our series is called Let's Make Lunch. And this is kind of a series that is geared toward kids and families. I'm trying to make things that are so easy to make and versatile. So if you don't like one ingredient, you can kind of change it out for another. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So since we're starting right now, and this is a brand new series, I thought the first thing we should probably go over are some tips for working in the kitchen, tips and safety. Because the kitchen can be a fairly dangerous place, but it's also a really fun place. So the very first thing you need to do before you start cooking anything is ask permission. So you want to make sure that it's okay with mom or dad or grandma or grandpa or whoever is watching you that you're in the kitchen cooking, and that they know to kind of keep their eye on you so they can, make sure you're not doing anything that's not safe. The second thing you need to do before you ever start cooking anything is wash your hands. So we're going to wash our hands. Make sure you use a nice little bit of soap and warm water. Get a good lather going. And I know everybody has been taught at this point how to wash their hands. And I don't know, what are you supposed to sing, like the alphabet song twice or something? So anyway, we're washing our hands. So get all the soap off. That is step number 2 before you ever start cooking. The third thing that we want to remember while we're in the kitchen is knife safety. Knives are very, very sharp, as they should be. And fingers can get cut very easily with the knives. So you just want to have a healthy respect for your knives. And if you are pretty new to using knives, you probably want to have an adult supervising you until you feel more comfortable using them by yourself. So the proper technique for using a knife is to keep your fingers, these things, tucked underneath. You still want to hold on to whatever you're chopping or cutting, but you want to tuck your fingers underneath so that blade can't get you, right? It can't get you that way. If you have your fingers out here, oh yeah, they can get them. So you just tuck your fingers under, but you're still holding on. You hold on with your thumb and your pinky, and the others just kind of hang on there because your thumb and your pinky are a little shorter. And then we're just going to slice our way through it, just like that. Oops. Okay. Just tuck. Also, once you're finished with your knives, you want to make sure not to just throw them into the sink of soapy water. Don't do that. If you do that, then somebody might stick their hand into the water, not knowing there's a sharp knife in there, and cut themselves. Or you might actually forget too. I've done that myself. So the third thing, knife skills. The fourth thing you want to remember when you're in the kitchen is that you're going to be working with fire or heat, stovetops, ovens, that sort of thing. So that's another thing you want to be very, very careful with. When you're finished using the oven or the stove, you want to make sure that you turn it off. So the oven's on. Oh, I'm finished with my baking. I'm going to make sure that oven is off. Same thing with the stovetop. You want to make sure all your dials are turned to the off position before you move on to something else. Another thing you want to make sure you do is if you have a pot on the stove, this is the wrong way to keep your pot on the stove because the handle is poking out. So somebody could come along and hit it and knock it over onto the ground and burn themselves. So what you want to do is turn your handles back towards the back of the stove. That way it's harder for anything to happen to it while it's on the stove. And sometimes burns happen. No matter how careful we are, sometimes you burn yourself. If you do burn yourself, make sure you tell your adult as soon as you can. And what you want to do is turn on the cold water and run your burn under the cold water, and that will help. If it's a really bad burn, your adult will know what to do, and they'll probably, may need to take you to the doctor or something if it's a really bad burn. Hopefully you don't get that kind of a burn. Another thing to remember is that if you have a fire on your stove, you shouldn't throw water on it, because sometimes that makes it actually worse, depending on what kind of fire it is. Grease fires and water do not go well together. If you put water into hot oil, it can splatter and burn you. So you want to be careful of not doing that. So if you do happen to have a fire on your stovetop, you want to use a fire extinguisher if you have one. You should use baking soda to put it out. You can just dump a bunch of baking soda on it, or you use a lid to smother any fire. Okay? And if it gets a little too much for you to handle, then you just want to get out of the house and call 911. And then the other thing about fire and hot stoves is you don't want to take your towel and put it on top of the stove or even close to the stove, because if this element was on, this would start on fire, and that would not be good. Likewise, you don't want to put paper towels on or near the stove top, or pot holders and things like that are flammable. So that is number 4. So our next thing to remember while we're in the kitchen is safe handling of food. And safe handling of food, I could go on and on about this for quite a while, because there's a lot of different parts to it. But we'll just kind of go over the basics that you may be dealing with. So we want to make sure that we don't cross-contaminate the food. There's bacteria on all things, basically. And raw meat has a lot of different bacteria on it. So when you are cutting raw meat on a cutting board, you want to make sure that if you change to cutting raw vegetables or cooked meats or anything else, basically, you only use the cutting board for raw things, and then you put it in the dishwasher or whatever. And then you also want to clean your knife after cutting anything like that, any raw meats or seafood. Once you're finished, clean your knife or get a new knife, and then cut the next thing up. So that's cross-contamination. So you want to make sure that if you use a plate for raw chicken, you need to either clean that plate or get a new plate for the cooked chicken. You don't want to put the cooked chicken on a plate that the raw chicken was on, because that can cross-contaminate the food and it can make you very sick. You also want to make sure that you keep food at the correct temperature. So after you are done eating a meal, or if you have leftovers, or if you have some ingredients left that need to be refrigerated, you want to make sure you package it in some sort of airtight container and put it in the fridge. Leaving food out at room temperature for too long also causes bacteria to build up and can make you sick. So be careful of that. Before you use any fruits or vegetables, you want to make sure you give them a good wash in the sink. You don't need to use soap or anything. Just, make sure you scrub them pretty good. And then obviously after you have cut up or touched hamburger, raw meat, anything that's raw, meat or seafood, you want to make sure you wash your hands again with soap and water to make sure you get all that bacteria off before you touch something else in the kitchen and cross-contaminate. So our last and final thing before we actually get started is just a few things to do before you get started cooking. So obviously the first thing, like I said, is ask permission. Always make sure you have permission to be in the kitchen cooking. The second thing you want to make sure you do is to read your recipe. There is nothing worse than starting to cook something and realize you are out of one of the ingredients. Oh no. or you don't have the right tools. So you want to make sure you read through your whole recipe and make sure you know how to do each of the things. Maybe there's a technique in there that you don't really know how to do. So you may need to look it up on YouTube and watch a video of how to do it before you start. Maybe there's a tool that you need that you don't have in your kitchen, and you may need to go out and get that before you can make this recipe. Or you may need to find some ingredients. Or you may have everything. So you want to read through your recipe, and then what most cooks do, and especially in restaurants, they definitely do this. They get their mise en place ready, and mise en place is a French term, and it means everything in its place. So basically, that just means that you want to make sure that you get all of your ingredients ready to go and measured and cut. Or in this case, I've got my cheese grated, and I've got my onion cut and my jalapeno cut, and they're all in their own containers ready to be added to my recipe as I go along. So that is mise en place, and that is the final step before you actually get your hands dirty and start cooking. So on our very first Let's Make Lunch, we are going to make quesadillas. What is a quesadilla? Oh, quesadillas are so delicious. They are basically a tortilla filled with cheese and melted. As long as you have a tortilla and cheese, you can make a very basic quesadilla. You can also put lots of other different things in to make it a little bit different if you'd like. We'll talk about that in a minute, but let's first talk about the history of quesadillas. So quesadillas are from Mexico, and traditionally quesadillas were made using corn tortillas and a cheese called Oaxaca cheese. It's a good stringy Mexican cheese, and that was what traditionally they were made from. But then towards northern Mexico and in the United States, we tend to use flour tortillas and any kind of cheese that we like. So the nice and traditionally in Mexico, they are cooked and they're cooked on a griddle called a comal, C-O-M-A-L. And they are cooked, the comals are usually like a cast iron, and they're cooked without oil. So that's how we do them here. We cook them without oil. It's a dry cooking. So quesadillas are fun because you really can use a variety of ingredients to make it your own, to make it the kind of thing that you like. So I've got a whole wheat tortilla here. You can use, sometimes they have flavored tortillas with spinach, and I've seen red pepper, or you can just use a regular flour tortilla, or if you want to be traditional, you could go and get corn tortillas. You can use whatever good melting cheese you would like. I've got some nice sharp cheddar here. It's an Irish sharp cheddar, which I really like. It melts pretty well. Other good melting cheeses are Gouda or Swiss or provolone, mozzarella. All of those kinds of cheeses, Havarti is another good one, are really good cheeses to use in a quesadilla. Besides the cheese, if you want to go a little bit fancier, maybe put a little protein in there. If you like black beans or red beans or pinto beans, you could put some beans in it. If you like taco meat, you could put some taco meat in it. You could put chicken or pork or beef, any of those things. But you want to make sure that whatever you do put in your quesadilla, besides the cheese, if you're putting meat or vegetables in your quesadilla, you want to cook them before you put them in, because they won't really be able to cook in the quesadilla. Basically, you only are cooking it to melt the cheese. So any kind of meat or anything like that has to be pre-cooked before you make your quesadilla. Some other things you may want to do is you may like sour cream as a topping, or some salsa. Or you could also put guacamole on it, or you could put just slices of avocado if you like that. So you really can be as inventive as you would like. I have a smoker, so I smoke brisket, beef brisket. So sometimes I have leftover brisket. A little bit of brisket in there is delicious. You can put caramelized onions in it. You can put zucchini. Like I said, though, you want to make sure all of those type of ingredients besides the cheese are cooked before you put it in your quesadilla. So I don't really have a recipe. I'm just using what I like and what I have on hand. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our stovetop, and I've got a nonstick skillet, and I'm going to turn my heat on to kind of a medium heat. I've got that on 4 right now. And we're going to wait just a second until that kind of heats up a little bit, and we're not going to put any oil in it. It's just going to be a dry pan. And you want to be careful once it gets hot. You don't want to touch your pan. Definitely. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to take our tortilla, and I'm going to just put that in the pan. And the next thing we're going to put in is our cheese, our queso. So we're going to put the queso in here. I like a lot. How about you, cameraman? Do you like a lot of cheese? A lot of queso? Yes. Who doesn't? All right, so we're going to put our queso in there. And for my quesadillas, we are going to add, I like a little raw onion sometimes, so I'm going to add a little raw onion. Just sprinkle it over the top as much as you want. I don't want to put a lot of onion in there, but a little bit is good. Looks good. And then I'm going to I've got some diced jalapenos from my gardens. I'm going to put some of those in. And then, these are going to be spicy, so be careful. All right, that looks good. And then we're just going to wait and watch the quesadilla until the cheese starts to melt. This is like a half quesadilla. So what we're going to do is eventually, once the cheese starts melting, we're going to flip it so that we fold it in half, basically, like a big taco. The other way to make a quesadilla would be to put another tortilla on the top, and then you flip the whole thing like a pancake, and then you can cut it into slices. So you can do it either way. I'm just going to do a half of a quesadilla tonight. And the other thing you're going to need is some sort of flipper, turner, spatula, whatever you want to call them, to flip and to take them out of your pan. So we're just going to wait a few minutes here. Oh, it's smelling really good in here. I am looking forward to the quesadilla. Starting to see a little bit of glistening of the cheese, which means that it's starting to heat up and break down and melt. This really looks good. So I think what I might do is flip it in half. It's not really very hot yet. So we're going to flip it in half. All the goodness, all the cheesy goodness is inside. So as you can see, I'm just going to pull this up a little bit. The cheese inside our quesadilla is starting to get really gooey and lovely. So we're going to poke that back down, and we're going to flip it over and see if it's browned up on the other side. A little bit. It's kind of hard to tell with these type of tortillas because they're brown anyway. But we're just going to leave that for a few more minutes. Okay, so our quesadilla is ready to go. It's all melted on the inside. So I am going to turn my heat off because we're done cooking. And then I'm going to very carefully lift the quesadilla out of the pan and onto my plate, like so. And then what I like to do is use my pizza wheel. Pizza cutters are great for cutting quesadillas. So we're gonna cut it in a couple of pieces. Whoop. Like that. Here's some cheesy goodness on our quesadilla, and they are very hot, so I'm not gonna hold that for too long. And I really like some sour cream and some salsa with my quesadilla, so I will top those with top my quesadilla with the sour cream and salsa and have it for dinner. So enjoy making your quesadillas, and we will see you in 2 weeks when we will be making grilled cheese sandwiches and homemade tomato soup. So until then, have a good one.